welcome to No Better Death, the podcast that knows while you can die no better death than your own, that doesn't mean we can't take a look for the unusual and noteworthy in the deaths of others. Each week we'll take an in-depth look at some out-of-the-ordinary deaths and the events surrounding them. This show will contain explicit language and graphic details. I'm your host, Sick Grayson. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 25. I do apologize for my absence. I sort of disappeared on you guys again. I was just sort of working a lot, 12, 14-hour days sometimes for 6, 7, 8 days in a row, just sort of trying to hustle up some funds for stuff going on here around the house. Plus, we had 3 birthdays to plan for and execute. Went out of town a few times, actually, various trips I had to go to with my family and whatnot. So just a really busy time of the year combined with working my ass off. But I have a little bit of spare time this week. I left my phone at a restaurant in Denver, so I can't actually do any of my side hustles until it gets here in the mail. So figured I'd come in, sit down, record episode 25. Sorry I kept you waiting. Thank you so much for tuning in and not forgetting about the show. If you're listening to this, I really appreciate it. I do love doing the show despite how it looks over the last 6 months. I haven't really kept up with it, but I'm going to try to start making time for it again, getting back to you on a weekly basis. Today, episode 25, which means we've beaten out something like 43% of all podcasts that ever start. And today I have a treat for you. Well, I hope it'll be a treat for you. It could totally suck. I don't know. It's not my call. I make it and release it. It's up to you to decide if the show has any value. As regular listeners know, I don't cover well-known cases or big serial killers that often. There's 100 other podcasts out there that can tell you about those stories in a more informed and entertaining way than I can. But today we will be discussing a famous serial killer, perhaps one of the most famous, my former pen pal, maybe future pen pal if I can get a P.O. box set up here in Colorado, and maybe in some odd way a friend. I'm not really sure what to call him. It's weird, you know. The son of Sam, aka the son of Hope, also known as David Berkowitz. So you probably want to know how Dave and I became pen pals. A few years ago, I created and wrote a comic book called Risher. Only one issue was ever released. My artist went on to do other projects and didn't really have time to put into basically working for free to try to get a new book off the ground. So we only ever released one issue, and the overall story of Risher was that many of the unsolved serial killer cases throughout history were really the work of one guy who couldn't die, that guy being Risher. The Reaper responsible for taking him at his time of death was busy doing something else, missed the appointment, and if you miss your appointment with death, like if death doesn't show on time, then you just get to live forever, is kind of the theory. And this guy, over time, just became sick of humanity and goes to different places with different MOs and just kind of kills people and then moves on to something else. And so he was Jack the Ripper, the Axeman of New Orleans, the Cleveland Torso Killer. I was thinking about making him be the Zodiac, but we never really got that far into the storyline. So anyway, serial killer comic book. And I thought it would be cool to have a letter from a serial killer in each issue. I wrote to Manson, Berkowitz, Ramirez, Kristen Gilbert, a few others. Actually wrote Ramirez twice. And he never got back to me. A lot of pen pals told me that you had to talk to him like a 5-year-old and send money for stamps. So I thought, maybe my first letter was, too many big adult words. So wrote to him again, sent him $5 for postage, and he still never wrote me back. So that dude was kind of a dick. But actually, no one wrote me back except David Berkowitz. Serial killer pen pals will tell you that getting Dave to write you back is hard. He's one of the harder gets because he's really only interested in talking about God at this point. It turns out that Dave writes to random churches telling his story of sin and salvation, and he happened to have written to a church in the town I was living in at the time, Scottsbluff, Nebraska. So when he saw a letter from Scottsbluff, he opened it thinking it was going to be someone from the church he had written to, and instead he got me. He read my letter and my proposal to submit something for the comic book, so he responded and we struck up a pen palship. In hindsight, I should have made copies of my letters to him so I'd have a record of both sides of the conversation, but I didn't, and it's been so long that I don't really remember what all I said to him, but hopefully I can surmise the gist of my side of the conversation. based on what he said in his letters. I'm going to get around to reading the letters that I have here from him. I think I've got 5 or so. Yeah, something like 5 of them. There was a lot of religious talk. I do recall that. I haven't read these in a few years, probably at least 3 years. I moved from Nebraska to Colorado about 3.5 years ago. Never got a P.O. box here, and you don't have prison mail sent to your house just as a general rule. So I haven't talked to Dave in about 4 years probably. And I think he's been moved to a different prison at this point, so I'll have to get his new address if I ever decide to get back to writing to him. So anyway, yeah, that's the story of how Berkowitz and I became pen pals. I just happened to write to him from a town that he recognized that he had written to somebody before, thought I had something to do with that, was interested in my proposal to have him write something for the comic book, and we corresponded over the course of a few letters. You'll see that Dave likes to keep the conversation about God, helping out in the prison infirmary, how he stays busy, positive things. He never really discusses his crimes, the dog, the possible satanic cult he later said was part of and then recanted. And that's a whole other thing to get into. That's what's known as the Process or the Process Church. Go fall down that rabbit hole when you get a chance. And I've been begging the guys from last podcast on the left to do a series on the Process Church. It ties Scientology to Charles Manson, to a guy named Sam, to David Berkowitz, all kinds of crazy shit. And the weirdest part of it all is that it's not that far-fetched. Nevik from Skinny Puppy told me about it once when I was talking to him, and I kind of fell down that rabbit hole after he suggested it. And it all sort of is some crazy shit that could play a role in David Berkowitz's story, but he refuses to talk about it and actually recanted the entire statement, possibly in fear of his life. That's getting off on another tangent. Go look up The Process. It's really cool / weird shit to check out. Point being, Dave doesn't really talk about the past, and I get the feeling it's because he does genuinely feel bad about what he did. He's serving over 400 years, multiple life sentences. He will never get out of prison, capital Never. So there's no point in keeping quiet until he runs out of appeals or trying to look like a decent human being in hope of some sort of pardon or overturning of the verdict. He's going to die in prison, and he knows that. So why not spill your guts about everything? There's really only one reason, and it's that he doesn't like to think about it because it was wrong. He knows it was wrong, and he feels bad about it. You know, in old age with medication and years of reflecting, learning, growing, he's not who he was when he did what he did, and he feels nothing good is going to come from thinking about it or discussing it. But that's just my thoughts on why he avoids the subject. As we'll see in these letters, Dave seems like a really friendly, level-headed person trying to help out and contribute to society in the only ways he can by lending a hand out around the prison. In fact, if you ignore the fact he killed 6 people and wounded 7 others, he seems like someone you could be friends with, you know, a decent human being. And this is where things get weird when you become pen pals or, on some level, sort of a friend or associate of a serial killer. On one hand, it's totally reasonable to believe that a person can change, can realize the error of their ways, and do their best to become a better person. People do it every day. Addicts get sober, cheaters become monogamous, and people with anger issues learn to control their rage. We are dynamic creatures capable of changing how we think, what we believe, and who we are. But with most serial killers, there's that thing where they're programmed to or have learned how to present themselves as who or whatever they need to be to benefit themselves based on the situation or the person they're dealing with. So can you ever actually trust them? Can someone who had it in them to murder multiple people actually change? Medication, therapy, a healthy environment can provide immeasurable benefits to someone suffering from a legitimate mental disorder, such as the case of Dave's suspected schizophrenia. But what about when you're dealing with a legitimate socio or psychopath? Can something that seems to be so deeply rooted for so long, perhaps since birth, something seemingly programmed into the very being of a person, ever be dealt with, mitigated, or quote-unquote cured? Can someone who murdered 6 people because he held such hate, or maybe hate's too personal, let's say disgust and disregard, for their fellow man ever truly change? Or is it part of the game they play? That game that is always on, no timeouts, no finish line, no first to however many points wins, the never-ending game of making you believe they are one thing while hiding what they truly are. Do they really change? Do they truly get their mind right and become good people? Or is it just another ploy, another disguise, another part of the trickery that's embedded into the very fiber of who they are? The only person that really knows the answer to that question is the killer. And even then, there are some who still don't know. Their mind is so off kilter they don't even know for themselves. Just to be safe, it's probably best to assume that people like this are incapable of change and just presenting a best version of themselves in order to manipulate you. Yes, that view is unfair to those few who really are capable of change and genuinely feel what they've done is wrong and are trying to be better. It's totally unfair. But when the alternative is being deceived, taken advantage of, and possibly murdered, possibly multiple lives in danger, what is a person and a society supposed to do? What are we supposed to believe? It's in our best interest to say, hey, you killed how many people? You're fucked. Go sit in your little hole until we kill you or you die. And on the off chance you truly do repent and become rehabilitated, as great as that is, no one gives a shit because the stakes are too high for us to ever trust you again. All that said, maybe I'm gullible, maybe the psycho serial killer charm works on me, maybe I care more about my fellow man than I realize. Maybe it's my predisposition to root for the underdog, or maybe, just maybe, I can see parallels between myself and David in how one or two minor differences, one bad day, one final turd in the sea of shit that is life, could have pushed me into being like him at some point. And as such, I sympathize. Who knows? Who knows why I have, why I think the way I do about this subject. Regardless of the reason, I do believe Dave today is not the Dave of 1977. Unfortunately, Dave of 1977 did some things that would put Dave of the future into a position that forced society to punish him for the rest of his life and never be able to trust him again. For the uninitiated, and I can't imagine that's many of you, if you're listening to this Bottom of the Barrel podcast, you have to have heard the story of the Son of Sam on other shows, seen documentaries, or are into serial killers enough to have done your own research into him. But for the uninitiated, what exactly did 1977 David Berkowitz do? I'll give you the condensed version of his life. This mostly comes from Wikipedia, and I don't really like using Wikipedia, but Dave's Wikipedia page actually seems fairly accurate. And with a little bit of the knowledge I've gleaned from various books, documentaries, and movies that I've committed to memory, I think I've got a pretty good rundown of Dave, his life, what he did, and then we'll get into the letters. David Richard Berkowitz, born Richard David Falco on June 1st, 1953, is known as the Son of Sam and the .44 caliber killer, who pleaded guilty to 8 separate shooting attacks that began in New York City during the summer of 1976. Using a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver, he killed 6 people and wounded 7 others by July 1977. As the number of victims increased, Berkowitz eluded the biggest police manhunt in the history of New York City while leaving letters that mocked the police and promised further crimes, which were highly publicized by the press. The killing spree terrorized New Yorkers and achieved worldwide notoriety. His mother, Elizabeth Broder, grew up as part of an impoverished Jewish family and married Tony Falco in 1936. After a marriage of less than 4 years, Falco left her for another woman. About a decade later, in 1950, Broder started a relationship with a married man named Joseph Kleinman. 3 years later, she became pregnant with a child whom she chose to give the surname Falco. So she's having an affair with this married dude, gets pregnant, and gives the kid the name of her ex-husband. Within a few days of this child being born, she gave the kid away. Although her reasons for doing so are unknown, most people have thought that Kleinman threatened to abandon her if she kept the baby and used his name, so she put it up for adoption, and the kid was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz. They were a Jewish-American couple who were hardware store retailers of modest means and childless in middle age. They reversed the order of his first and middle names, gave him his last name, and there you have David Richard Berkowitz. He was raised as an only child. and that his childhood was, a lot of people speculated his childhood was somewhat troubled. Although of above average intelligence, he lost interest in learning at an early age and became infatuated with petty larceny and starting fires. Neighbors and relatives would recall Berkowitz as difficult, spoiled, and a bully. His adoptive parents consulted at least one psychotherapist due to his misconduct, but his misbehavior never resulted in a legal intervention or serious mention in his school records. So they just sort of wrote it off as like kind of a hard-headed boy just getting into mischief. His mom died of breast cancer, or his adopted mom died of breast cancer when he was 14 years old, and his home life became strained during later years, particularly because he disliked his adoptive father's second wife. At the age of 17 in 1971, he joined the Army and served in the U.S. and South Korea. After an honorable discharge in 1974, he located his birth mother, Betty. After a few visits, she disclosed the details of his illegitimate birth. And this news bothered him a lot. He was particularly distraught by the array of reluctant father figures. Forensic anthropologist Elliot Layton described Berkowitz's discovery of his adoption and illegitimate birth as the primary crisis of his life. So they're saying this kind of broke his brain a little bit, a revelation that shattered his sense of identity. His communication with his birth mother lapsed, but for a time he remained in communication with his half-sister Rosalind. He subsequently had several non-professional jobs, and at the time of his arrest was working as a letter sorter for the U.S. Postal Service. In 1976, a friend from the Army purchased a .44 caliber Bulldog handgun for Berkowitz, and that was the gun he would use to go on this spree with. During the mid-1970s, Berkowitz started to commit violent crimes. He bungled a first attempt at murder using a knife and then switched to a handgun and began a lengthy crime spree throughout the New York boroughs of the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. He sought young female victims and was most attracted to women with long, dark, wavy hair. All but one of the crime sites involved two victims. He famously committed his attacks while the women sat with boyfriends in parked cars, kind of just shooting at them through the door and the window. He exhibited an enduring enjoyment of his activities, often returning to the scenes of his crimes. Berkowitz claimed that he committed his first attack on Christmas Eve 1975 when he used a hunting knife to stab two women. One alleged victim was never identified by police, but the other was teenager Michelle Foreman, whose injuries were serious enough for her to be hospitalized. Berkowitz was never suspected of the crime, and soon afterward he moved to an apartment in Yonkers, just north of the New York City border. The first shooting attributed to the son of Sam occurred in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx at about 1:10 a.m. on July 29, 1976. Donna Loria and her friend Jody Valenti were sitting in Valenti's Oldsmobile discussing their evening at Peachtree's, which was a discotheque in the area. Loria opened the car door to leave and noticed a man quickly approaching the car. Startled and angered by the man's sudden appearance, she said, "Now, what is this?" And the man produced a pistol from a paper bag he was carrying and crouched down. He braced one elbow on his knee, aimed his weapon with both hands, and fired. Loria was struck by one bullet that killed her instantly. Valenti was shot in her thigh, and a third bullet missed both of them. The shooter turned and walked away quickly. Valenti survived her injuries and said that she did not recognize the killer. She described him as a white male in his 30s with a fair complexion, 5'9", weighing about 160 pounds. His hair was short, dark, and curly in a mod style. This description was repeated by Loria's father, who claimed to have seen a similar man sitting in a yellow compact car parked nearby. Neighbors gave corroborating reports to police that an unfamiliar yellow compact car had been cruising the area for hours before the shooting. Most of Berkowitz's activity was in Queens, though he lived farther north in Yonkers. On October 23, 1976, a similar shooting occurred in a secluded residential area of Flushing, Queens, next to Brown Park. Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan were sitting in Keenan's parked car when the windows suddenly shattered. "I felt the car exploded," Denaro said later. Keenan quickly started the car and sped away for help. The panicked couple did not realize that someone had been shooting at them, even though Denaro was bleeding from a bullet wound to his head. Keenan had only superficial injuries from the broken glass, but Denaro eventually needed a metal plate to replace a portion of his skull. Neither victim saw the attacker. Police determined that the bullets embedded in Keenan's car were .44 caliber, but they were so damaged and deformed that they thought it unlikely they could ever be linked to a particular weapon. DeNaro had shoulder-length hair, and police later speculated that the shooter had mistaken him for a girl. Keenan's father was a 20-year veteran police detective of the NYPD, and this caused an intense investigation. As with the Loria Valenti shooting, however, there seemed not to be any motive for the shooting, and police made little progress with the case. Many details of the DeNaro-Keenan shooting were very similar to the Loria Valenti case, but police did not initially associate them, partly because the shootings occurred in different boroughs and were investigated by different local police precincts. And I haven't given ages on any of the victims, but I think so far the oldest one has been 20. I mean, most of these were 16 to 18-year-old. Carl DeNaro was 20, and so far he's the oldest one I've told you about. These are all 16 to 20-year-old people. He's out here shooting kids. Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lamino walked home from a movie soon after midnight on November 27, 1976. They were chatting on the porch of Lamino's home in Belrose, Queens, when a man dressed in military fatigues who seemed to be in his early 20s approached them and began to ask for directions. In a high-pitched voice, he said, "Can you tell me how to get?" but then quickly produced a revolver. They said a high-pitched voice. That's a high-pitched voice, right? Can you tell me how to get to? But then he pulls a gun out. He shot each of the victims once, and as they fell to the ground injured, he fired several more times, striking the apartment building before running away. A neighbor heard the gunshots, rushed out of the apartment building, and saw a blond man rush by gripping a pistol in his left hand. DeMasi had been shot in the back, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. Lamino was hit in the back and hospitalized in serious condition. She was ultimately rendered paraplegic, so paralyzed this chick. During the early morning of January 30th, 1977, Christine Freund and her fiancé John Deal, and these are 26 and 30, so not quite as young as the other victims, were sitting in Deal's car near the Forest Hills LIRR station in Queens, preparing to drive to a dance hall after having seen the movie Rocky. 3 gunshots penetrated the car at about 12:40 a.m. In a panic, Deal drove away for help. He suffered minor superficial injuries, but Freund was shot twice and died several hours later in the hospital. Neither victim had seen their attacker. Police made the first public acknowledgement of the Freund-Deal shooting as similar to earlier incidents and that the crimes might be associated. All the victims had been struck with .44 caliber bullets, and the shooting seemed to target young women with long dark hair. NYPD Sergeant Richard Conlon stated that police were leaning towards a connection in all these cases. Composite sketches were released of the black-haired Loria Valenti shooter and the blonde Lamino DeMasi shooter, and Conlon noted that police were looking for multiple suspects, not just one. At about 7:30 p.m. on March 8, 1977, Columbia University student Virginia Sposkirchian was walking home from school when she was confronted by an armed man. She lived about a block from where Christine Freund was shot. In a desperate move to defend herself, she lifted her textbooks between herself and the killer, but the makeshift shield was penetrated, the bullet striking her in the head and killing her. Moments after the shooting, a neighborhood resident who had heard the gunshots was rounding the corner onto the young woman's street, and he nearly ran into a person with whom he described as a short, husky boy, 16 to 18 years old and clean-shaven, wearing a sweater and watch cap, who was sprinting away from the crime scene. The neighbor said that the youth pulled the cap over his face and said, "Oh Jesus," as he sprinted by. Other neighbors claimed to have seen the teenager as well as another person matching Berkowitz's description loitering separately in the area for about an hour before the shooting. During the following days, the media repeated police claims that this chubby teenager was the suspect. There were no direct witnesses to the murder. In a March 10, 1977 press conference, NYPD officials and the New York City Mayor Abraham Beame declared that the same .44 Bulldog revolver had fired the shots that killed Loria and this last lady, Voskirchian. Official documents were later revealed, however, saying that police strongly suspected that the same .44 Bulldog had been used in the shootings, but that the evidence was actually inconclusive. The crimes were discussed by the local news media virtually every day. Circulation increased dramatically for the New York Post and daily newspapers, with graphic crime reporting and commentary. Foreign media featured many of the reports as well, including front-page articles on newspapers such as the Vatican's La Osservatore Romano, the Hebrew newspaper Maariv, and the Soviet Izvestia. So, worldwide headlines. At about 3 a.m., April 17, 1977, Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani were sitting in Suriani's car near her home in the Bronx, only a few blocks from the scene of the Loria Valenti shooting, when each was shot twice. Suriani died at the scene, and Esau died in the hospital several hours later without being able to describe his attacker. Police said that the weapon used for the crime was the same as the one which they had suspected in the earlier shootings, .44 cal. During the days afterwards, they repeated their theory that only one man was responsible for the 44 murders. Chubby teenager in the Voskirchian case was still regarded as a witness, while the dark-haired man who shot Loria and Valenti was considered the suspect. Police discovered a handwritten letter near the bodies of Esau and Suriani, mostly written in block capitals with a few lowercase letters and addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli. With this letter, Berkowitz revealed the name Son of Sam for the first time. The press had previously dubbed the killer the .44 caliber killer because of his weapon of choice. The letter was initially withheld from the public, but some of its contents were revealed to the press, and the name Son of Sam quickly replaced the old name. The letter expressed the killer's determination to continue his work and taunted the police for their fruitless efforts to capture him. In full, with misspellings intact, the letter read. You should probably go online, look these letters up yourself, check them out, because there's a lot of misspellings that, they're left in the letter as I'm reading it, but for me to try to read it and explain it as the misspelling is just going to be too much of a pain in the ass, so I'm just going to read it how it's supposed to sound. But you can go on to Wikipedia or any other serial killer website that has this and pull it up and just read it. The letter said, I am deeply hurt by your calling me a woman hater. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young, raped, and slaughtered, their blood drained, just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic, too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody else, programmed to kill. However, to stop me, you must kill me. Attention all police. Shoot me first. Shoot to kill or else. Keep out of my way or you will die. Papa Sam is old now. He needs some blood to preserve his youth. He has had too many heart attacks. Too many heart attacks. Me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy. I miss my pretty princess most of all. She's resting in Our Lady's house, but I'll see her soon. I am the monster, Beelzebub, and the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets, looking for fair game, tasty meat. The women of Queens are the prettiest of all. I must be the water they drink. I live for the hunt. My life. Blood for Papa. Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill anymore. No, sir. No more, but I must honor thy father. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong on earth. Return me to Yahoos, to the people of Queens. I love you. And I want to wish all of you a happy Easter. May God bless you in this life and in the next, and for now I say goodbye and good night. Police, let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. To be interrupted as bang, 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 bang. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster. At the time, police speculated that the letter writer might be familiar with Scottish English. The phrase "me oot, it hurts, sonny boy" was taken as a Scottish accented version of "my heart, it hurts, sonny boy." And the police also hypothesized that the shooter blamed a dark-haired nurse for his father's death, due to the "too many heart attacks" phrase and the facts that Loria was a medical technician and Valenti was studying to be a nurse. On July 28th, New York Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin alluded to the women quirk and referred to the shooter watching the world from his attic window. The killer's unusual attitude towards police and the media received widespread scrutiny. Psychologists observed that many serial killers gain gratification by eluding pursuers and observers. The feeling of out-of-control media, law enforcement, and even entire populations provides a source of social power for them. After consulting with several psychiatrists, police received a psychological profile of their suspect on May 26, 1977. He was described as neurotic and probably suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and believed himself to be a victim of demonic possession. On May 30, 1977, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the .44 caliber shooter. The letter was postmarked early that same day in Englewood, New Jersey. On the reverse of the envelope, neatly handprinted in 4 precisely centered lines, were the words "Blood and Family, Darkness and Death, Absolute Depravity, 44. The letter inside read, "Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC, and from the ants that dwell in these cracks and feed in the dried blood of the dead that has settled into the cracks. JB, I'm just dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous 44 killings. I also want to tell you that I read your column daily and I find it quite informative. Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th? You can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria, and you cannot let the people forget her either. She was a very, very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think that because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather, I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night. Thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam. I love my work. Now, the void has been filled. Perhaps we shall meet face to face someday, or perhaps I will be blown away by cops with smoking 38s. Whatever, if I shall be fortunate enough to meet you, I will tell you all about it, Sam, if you like, and I will introduce you to him. His name is Sam the Terrible. Not knowing what the future holds, I shall say farewell, and I will see you at the next job. Or should I say, you will see my handiwork at the next job. Remember Miss Loria. Thank you. In their blood and from the gutter, Sam's creation, 44. Here are some names to help you along. Forward them to the inspector for use by NCIC, the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. Please inform all the detectives working the slain to remain. P.S. JB, inform all the detectives working the case that I wish them the best of luck. Keep 'em digging, drive on, think positive, get off your butts, knock on coffins, etc. Upon my capture, I promise to buy all the guys working on the case a new pair of shoes if I can get up the money. Son of Sam. Underneath the Son of Sam was a logo or sketch that combined several symbols. The writer's question, "What will you have for July 29th?" was considered an ominous threat. July 29th would be the anniversary of the first .44 caliber shooting. Breslin notified police, who thought that the letter was probably from someone with knowledge of the shootings. The Breslin letter was sophisticated in its wording and presentation, especially when compared to the crudely written first letter, and police suspected that it might have been created in an art studio or similar professional location by someone with expertise in printing, calligraphy, or graphic design. The unusual writing caused the police to speculate that the killer was a comic letterer, and they asked staff members of DC Comics whether they recognized the lettering. The Wicked King Wicker reference caused police to arrange a private screening of The Wicker Man, a 1973 horror movie. The New York Daily News published the letter a week later after agreeing with police to withhold portions of the text, and Breslin urged the killer to surrender himself. The dramatic article made that day's paper the highest-selling edition of the Daily News to date. More than 1.1 million copies were sold. Police received thousands of tips based on references in the publicized portions of the letter, all of which proved useless. All of the shooting victims to date had long dark hair, and thousands of women in New York acquired short cuts or brightly colored dyes, and beauty supply stores had trouble meeting the demand for wigs. On June 26, 1977, there was another shooting. Sal Lupo and Judy Placido had left the Elfis discotheque in Bayside, Queens, and were sitting in Lupo's parked car at about 3 a.m. when 3 gunshots blasted through the vehicle. Lupo was wounded in the right forearm while Placido was shot in the right temple, shoulder, and back of the neck, but both victims survived their injuries. Lupo told police that the young couple had been discussing the Son of Sam case only moments before the shooting. Neither Lupo nor Placido had seen their attacker, but 2 witnesses reported a tall, dark-haired man in a leisure suit fleeing from the area. One claimed to see him leave in a car and even supplied a partial license plate number. Another report described a blond man with a mustache who drove from the scene in a Chevy Nova without turning on its headlights. Police speculated that the dark-haired man was the shooter and that the blond man had observed the crime. The first anniversary of the initial .44 caliber shootings was approaching, and police established a sizable dragnet that emphasized past hunting grounds in Queens and the Bronx. However, the next and final .44 shooting occurred in Brooklyn. Early on July 31, 1977, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante, both 20, were in Violante's car, which was parked under a streetlight near a city park in the neighborhood of Bath Beach. They were kissing when a man approached within 3 feet of the passenger side of Violante's car and fired 4 rounds into the car, striking both victims in the head before he escaped into the park. Violante lost one of his eyes, and Moskowitz died from her injuries. That night, Detective John Filetico was awakened at home and told to report to the 10th Homicide Division at the 60th Precinct Station in Coney Island. He was given 2 weeks to work on the Moskowitz and Violante case as a normal murder investigation. If it could not be solved in that time frame, it had to be given to the Son of Sam task force. Local resident Cecilia Davis was walking her dog at the scene of the Moskowitz shooting when she saw patrol officer Michael Cantaneo ticketing a car that was parked near a fire hydrant. Moments after the traffic police had left, a young man walked past her from the area of the car, and he seemed to study her with some interest. Davis felt concerned because he was wielding in his hand some kind of dark object. She ran to her home only to hear shots fired behind her in the street. Davis remained silent about this experience for 4 days until she finally contacted police, who closely checked every car that had been ticketed in the area that night. Berkowitz's 1970 4-door yellow Ford Galaxy was among the cars they investigated. On August 9, 1977, NYP detective James Justice telephoned Yonkers police to ask them to schedule an interview with Berkowitz. The Yonkers police dispatcher who first took Justice's call was Wheat Carr, the daughter of Sam Carr and sister of Berkowitz's alleged cult confederates John and Michael Carr. Justice asked the Yonkers police for some help tracking down Berkowitz. According to Mike Novotny, a sergeant for the Yonkers Police Department, the Yonkers police had their own suspicions about Berkowitz in connection with other strange crimes in Yonkers, crimes that they saw referred to in one of the Son of Sam letters. To the shock of the NYPD, they told the detective that Berkowitz might just be the Son of Sam. The next day, August 10, 1977, police investigated Berkowitz's car that was parked on the street outside his apartment building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. They saw a rifle in the back seat, searched the car, and found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Omega Task Force. Police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave the apartment rather than risk a violent encounter in the building's narrow hallway. They also waited to obtain a search warrant for the apartment, worried that their search might be challenged in court. The initial search of the vehicle was based on the rifle that was visible in the back seat, although possession of such a rifle was legal in New York State and required no special permit. The warrant still had not arrived when Berkowitz exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m. and entered his car. Detective John Felitico approached from the driver's side of the car and pointed his gun close to Berkowitz's temple, while Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger's side. A paper bag containing a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver of the type that was identified in ballistics tests was found next to Berkowitz in the car. As described in The Son of Sam by Lawrence D. Klausner, Detective Felitico remembered the big, inexplicable smile on the man's face. "Now that I got you," Detective Felitico said to the suspect, "who have I got?" "You know," the man said. "No, I don't. You tell me." The man turned his head. "I am Sam." "You are Sam? Sam who?" "Sam. David Berkowitz." An alternative version claimed that Berkowitz's first words were reported to be, "Well, you got me. How come it took you such a long time?" Detective John Felitico was officially credited by New York City Police Department as the arresting officer of the Son of Sam. Police searched apartment 7E and found it in disarray with satanic graffiti on the walls. They also found diaries that he had kept since he was 21 years old. 3 stenographers' notebooks, nearly all full, wherein Berkowitz meticulously noted hundreds of arsons that he claimed to have set throughout New York City. Some sources allege that this number might be over 1,400. Soon after Berkowitz's arrest, the address of the building was changed from 35 Pine Street to 42 Pine Street in an attempt to end its notoriety. After the arrest, Berkowitz was briefly held in a Yonkers police station before being transported directly to the 60th Precinct in Coney Island, where the detectives' task force was located. At about 1 a.m., Mayor Abraham Beam arrived to see the suspect personally. After a brief and wordless encounter, he announced to the media, "The people of the city of New York can rest easy because the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the Son of Sam." Berkowitz was interrogated for about 30 minutes in the early morning of August 11, 1977. He quickly confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. During questioning, Berkowitz claimed that his neighbor's dog was one of the reasons that he had killed, stating that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls. He said that the Sam mentioned in the first letter was his former neighbor, Sam Carr. Berkowitz claimed that Carr's black Labrador retriever, Harvey, was possessed by an ancient demon and that it issued irresistible commands that Berkowitz must kill people. Interjecting here for a moment, of course there were countless hours of interviews with police and the FBI after the initial confession, and if you've read Mindhunter, then you know that during one of those interviews Dave admitted that the dog thing was bullshit. But then he also later spoke of a satanic cult, which most believe to be the process, which he also later recanted, so who the fuck knows? Only Dave, and he'll never tell the total truth, or at least the total truth as he believes it. A few weeks after his arrest and confession, Berkowitz was permitted to communicate with the press. In a letter to the New York Post dated September 19, 1977, Berkowitz alluded to his original story of demonic possession, but closed with a warning that has been interpreted by some investigators as an admission of criminal accomplices. There are other sons out there. God help the world. See, never a straight answer from this guy. 3 separate mental health examinations determined that Berkowitz was competent to stand trial. Despite this, defense lawyers advised Berkowitz to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, but Berkowitz refused. He appeared calm in court on May 8, 1978, as he pleaded guilty to all of the shootings. At his sentencing 2 weeks later, Berkowitz caused an uproar when he attempted to jump out of a window on the 7th floor courtroom. After he was restrained, he repeatedly chanted, "Stacy was a whore," and shouted, "I'd kill her again! I'd kill them all again!" The court ordered another psychiatric examination before sentencing could proceed. During the evaluation, Berkowitz drew a sketch of a jailed man surrounded by numerous walls. At the bottom he wrote, "I am not well at all." Nonetheless, Berkowitz was again found competent to stand trial. On June 12, 1978, Berkowitz was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for each murder to be served consecutively. He was ordered to serve time in Attica Correctional Facility, an upstate New York supermax prison. Despite prosecutors' objections, the terms of Berkowitz's guilty plea made him eligible for parole in 25 years. At a press conference in February 1979, Berkowitz declared that his previous claims of demonic possession were a hoax. Berkowitz stated in a series of meetings with his special court-appointed psychiatrist David Abrahamson that he had long contemplated murder to get revenge on a world that he felt had rejected and hurt him. Probably the closest thing to the truth we'll ever actually get. After his arrest, Berkowitz was initially confined to a psychiatric ward in Kings County Hospital, where the staff reported that he seemed remarkably untroubled by his new environment. On the day after his sentencing, he was taken first to Sing Sing Prison and then to upstate Clinton Correctional Facility for psychiatric and physical examinations. 2 more months were spent at the Central New York Psychiatric Center in Marcy before his admission to Attica Prison. And he served about a decade in Attica before he was relocated around 1990 to Sullivan Correctional Facility, and that's where he was during our pen palship. In Fallsburg, New York, where he remained for many years until he was transferred to Shawangunk Correctional Facility, so he has been moved since I last spoke with him. Berkowitz described life in Attica as a nightmare. In 1979, there was an attempt on his life in which the left side of his neck was slashed open from front to back, resulting in a wound that required more than 50 stitches. Berkowitz refused to identify his assailant, and he only claimed that he was grateful for the attack. It brought a sense of justice, or in his own words, the punishment that I deserved. So he kind of felt like he deserved it, I guess. In 1987, Berkowitz became an evangelical Christian in prison. According to his personal testimony, his moment of conversion occurred after reading Psalm 34:6 from a Bible given to him by a fellow inmate. He says he is no longer to be referred to as the son of Sam, but the son of Hope. Before his first parole hearing in 2002, Berkowitz sent a letter to New York Governor Georgia Pataki asking that it be canceled. He wrote, "In all honesty, I believe that I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I have, with God's help, long ago come to terms with my situation, and I have accepted my punishment." Officials at the Sullivan facility duly rejected his case. Berkowitz is entitled to a parole hearing every 2 years as mandated by state law, but he has consistently refused to ask for his release, sometimes skipping the hearings altogether. In his 2016 hearing at Shawangunk, Berkowitz stated that while parole was unrealistic, he felt he had improved himself behind bars, adding, "I feel I am no risk whatsoever." His lawyer, Mark Heller, noted that prison staff considered Berkowitz to be a model prisoner, but commissioners once again denied parole. Soon after his imprisonment, Berkowitz invited Malachi Martin, an exorcist, to help him compose an autobiography, but the offer was not accepted. During later years, Berkowitz developed his memoirs with assistance from evangelical Christians. His statements were released as an interview video, Son of Hope, during 1998, with a more extensive work related in book form entitled Son of Hope, The Prison Journals of David Berkowitz, which was published in 2006. Berkowitz does not receive any royalties or profit from any sales of his works. He has continued to write essays on faith and repentance to Christian websites. His own official website is maintained on his behalf by a church group since he is not allowed access to a computer. Berkowitz stays involved with prison ministry and regularly counsels troubled inmates. While in the Sullivan facility, he pursued education and graduated with honors from Sullivan Community College. In 2002, during the DC sniper attacks, Berkowitz wrote a letter telling the sniper to stop hurting innocent people. Berkowitz made his comments in a 3-page letter to Rita Cosby, senior Chicago correspondent for Fox News Channel, after Cosby wrote him seeking his comment on the sniper attacks. I don't think it works that way. I mean, I get that coworkers at a normal job share info and tips and kind of talk to each other about the work they do or whatever, but when your job is being an unhinged serial killer, you can't really reason with your coworkers because they're unhinged too, most likely not in the same way you are. Like, what were they hoping to get when Berkowitz sent out this appeal to the DC sniper of hey man, knock it off? What? During June 2005, Berkowitz sued one of his previous lawyers for the misappropriation of a large number of letters, photographs, and other personal possessions. Hugo Harmatz, a New Jersey attorney, had represented Berkowitz in an earlier legal effort to prevent the National Enquirer from buying one of his letters. Harmatz then self-published his own collection of letters and memorabilia, Dear David, in 2005, which he had obtained from Berkowitz during their consultations. Berkowitz stated that he would only drop the lawsuit if the attorney signed over all the money he had made to the victims' families. In October 2006, Berkowitz and Harmatz settled out of court, with Harmatz agreeing to return the disputed items and to donate part of his book profits to the New York State Crime Victims Board. In 1979, Berkowitz mailed a book about witchcraft to police in North Dakota. He had underlined several passages and written a few marginal notes, including the phrase, "Arliss Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain," followed to California, Stanford University. The reference was to Arliss Perry, a 19-year-old North Dakota newlywed who had been murdered at Stanford on October 12, 1974. Her death and the notorious abuse of her corpse in a Christian chapel on campus was a widely reported case. Berkowitz mentioned the Perry attack in other letters, suggesting that he knew details of it from the perpetrator himself. Local police investigators interviewed him, but they now believe he has nothing of value to offer. The Arliss Perry case has since been solved. After his admission to Sullivan Prison, Berkowitz began to claim that he had joined a satanic cult in the spring of 1975. In 1993, Berkowitz made these claims known when he announced to the press that he had only killed 3 of the Son of Sam victims, Donna Laurier, Alexander Esau, and Valentina Suriani. In his revised version of the events, Berkowitz stated that other shooters were involved and that he fired the gun only in the first attack and the 6th attack. He said that he and several other cult members were involved in every incident by planning the events, providing early surveillance of the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers at the crime scenes. Berkowitz stated that he could not divulge the names of most of his accomplices without putting his family directly at risk. What family? His dad that he didn't hang out with anymore? Among Berkowitz's alleged unnamed associates was a female cult member whom he claims first fired a gun at DeNaro and Keenan, both of whom survived. Berkowitz said because the alleged accomplice was unfamiliar with the powerful recoil of a .44 Bulldog. Berkowitz declared that at least 5 cult members were at the scene of the Freund Dial shooting, but the actual shooter was a prominent cult associate who had been brought in from outside New York with an unspecified motive, a cult member whom he identified only by his nickname, Manson II. Another unnamed person was the gunman in the Moskowitz Violante case, a male cult member who had arrived from North Dakota for the occasion, also without explanation. Berkowitz did name 2 of the cult members, John and Michael Carr. That last name again, Carr. Remember, he said his neighbor who owned the dog was named Sam Carr. The 2 men were sons of the dog owner, Sam Carr, and they lived on nearby Warburton Avenue. Both of these other sons of Sam's were long dead. John Carr had been killed by a shooting judged a suicide in North Dakota, and Michael Carr had been in a fatal car accident in 1979. Berkowitz claimed that the actual perpetrator of the DeMasi Lamino shooting was John Carr, and he added that a Yonkers police officer, also a cult member, was involved in this crime. He claimed that Michael Carr fired the shots at Lupo and Placido. Journalist John Hockenberry asserts that even aside from the satanic cult claims, many officials doubted the single shooter theory, writing, "What most don't know about the Son of Sam case is that from the beginning not everyone bought the idea that Berkowitz acted alone." John Santucci, Queens District Attorney at the time of the killings, and police investigator Mike Novotny both expressed their convictions that Berkowitz had accomplices. And they did always keep talking about seeing a blonde guy, right? So maybe there was accomplices? NYPD officer Richard Johnson, involved in the original investigations, has opined that unresolved discrepancies in statements from witnesses and surviving victims indicate Berkowitz did not act alone. Why are there 3 suspect cars, 5 different suspect descriptions, different heights, different shapes, different sizes of the perpetrator? Somebody else was there. Other contemporaries have voiced their belief that the satanic cult theory, including Donna Lauria's father, Carl DeNaro, who stated in his opinion that more than one person was involved, but admitted he could not prove the cult theory. DeNaro's conclusion rests on his criticism of Berkowitz's statement to police as totally false. John Dial's recollection is that he physically bumped into Berkowitz outside the Wine Gallery restaurant, and he and Christine Freund departed and walked to his car where the shooting occurred. Berkowitz, in contrast, told the police that he passed within a few feet of Dial and Freund shortly before they entered the car. Dial contends that he and Freund passed no one on their way to the car, and further that the placement of the car parked at the curb would have made it impossible for Berkowitz to have sneaked up on them a few minutes before their encounter. So Dial reasons that he was shot by someone other than Berkowitz. Even the victims are saying there was more than one person there. Hockenberry's own report was broadcast by network news and given much exposure by Dateline NBC in 2004. In it, he discusses another journalist, Maury Terry, who had begun investigating the Son of Sam shootings before Berkowitz was arrested. Terry published a series of investigative articles in the Gannett newspapers in 1979 which challenged the official explanation of a lone gunman. Vigorously denied by police at the time, Terry's articles were widely read and discussed. They were later assembled in book form as The Ultimate Evil in 1987 and then a second edition in 1999. Largely impelled by these reports of accomplices and satanic cult activity, the Son of Sam case was reopened by Yonkers police in 1996, but no new charges were filed. Due to lack of findings, the investigation was eventually suspended but officially remains open. From prison, Berkowitz continues to assert and expand upon his claims of demonic possession. He stated in a series of 9 videos in 2015 that the voice he heard was that of Sam Hain, a druid devil, and that the true origin of Son of Sam was this devil. He added that it was never a dog, saying that detail was fabricated by the media. So again, so many versions, so much changing of the story. And it is true that the media, law enforcement, the public, and the judicial system have a way of distorting things, then publicizing these distorted details to the point that a majority of people come to take them as fact. We see it all the time. Once enough people think something is a fact, then it becomes a fact whether it actually is or not. So again, who knows? Only Dave. And he'll never shoot 100% straight on any of this. It's so annoying, so frustrating. Like, why can't he just give us one straight story? Berkowitz's later claims are dismissed by many. Breslin rejected his story of satanic cult accomplices, stating that when they talked to David Berkowitz that night, he recalled everything step by step by step. The guy has 1000% recall, and that's it. He's the guy, and there's nothing else to look at. Skeptics include a former FBI profiler, John Douglas, who spent hours interviewing Berkowitz, Mindhunter. He states that he was convinced Berkowitz acted alone and was an introverted loner not capable of being involved in group activity. Dr. Harvey Schlossberg, an NYPD psychologist, states in Against the Law, a documentary about the Son of Sam case, that he believes that the satanic cult claims are nothing but a fantasy concocted by Berkowitz to absolve himself of the crimes. And then Elliot Layton, in the 2001 book Hunting Humans, argues that recent journalistic attempts to abridge or even deny Berkowitz's guilt have lacked all credibility. So a lot of people on both sides saying he acted alone or he didn't act alone. Decades after his arrest, the name Son of Sam remains widely recognized as that of a notorious serial killer. Many manifestations in popular culture have helped perpetuate this notoriety, while Berkowitz himself continues to express remorse on Christian websites. Nisa Moskowitz, who previously had not hidden her hatred of Berkowitz, wrote him a letter shortly before her own death in 2006, forgiving him for killing her daughter. After rampant speculation about publishers offering Berkowitz large sums of money for his story, the New York State legislature swiftly passed a new law that prevented convicted criminals and their relatives from making any financial profit from books, movies, or other enterprises related to the stories of their crimes. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down the so-called Son of Sam law for violating the First Amendment's right of free expression in the 1991 case of Simon & Schuster, Inc. versus Victims Crime Board, but New York produced a constitutionally revised version of the law the following year. Similar laws have since been enacted in 41 states and at the federal level. So yeah, Son of Sam law basically says a murderer can't make profit off their murders. So no movie deals, no book deals, no merchandise, none of that kind of shit. Jimmy Breslin, in collaboration with writer Dick Schaap, published a novelized account of the murders, 44, in 1978, less than a year after Berkowitz's arrest. The highly fictionalized plot recounts the exploits of a Berkowitz-based character dubbed Bernard Rosenfeld. Outside of North America, the book was renamed Son of Sam. The 2016 young adult novel Burn Baby Burn by Meg Medina is set in New York during 1977 and depicts how fear of being one of the Son of Sam victims affected the daily lives of people in the area. The Spike Lee drama Summer of Sam was released in 1999 with actor Michael Badalucco in the role of Son of Sam. The film depicts the tensions that developed in a Bronx neighborhood during the shootings, and Berkowitz's part is largely symbolic. A minor character in the script, he functions mostly as a berserk metaphor for Lee's view of the 70s as a period of amoral excess. Berkowitz was reported to be disturbed by what he called the exploitation of the ugliness of the past. Other movie portrayals of Berkowitz include the Uli Lommel DVD release Son of Sam in 2008 and the CBS television movie Out of the Darkness in 1985. The character Son of Sam played a significant minor role in the miniseries The Bronx is Burning in 2007. Son of Sam has been popularly and mistakenly associated with the contemporaneous song Psycho Killer by Talking Heads, ba 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 ba. Likewise, Elliott Smith has stated that his song Son of Sam is not literally about Berkowitz. Compositions more directly inspired by the events include Son of Sam by the Dead Boys, Son of Sam by Chain Gang, and Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun by the Beastie Boys. Guitarist Scott Pruteski used the stage name David Berkowitz while playing with Marilyn Manson in the 1990s, or Daisy Berkowitz, Scott, rest in peace Scott, he died from cancer, Daisy Berkowitz of course. In the band's song Son of Man conspicuously describes Berkowitz. Several other rock musicians established a full ensemble named Son of Sam during 2000. A cartoon composite of Berkowitz and the breakfast cereal icon Toucan Sam was featured in Green Jelly's comedy rock video Serial Killer in 1992 by the name of Toucan Son of Sam, but it was later removed under threat of copyright lawsuit by the Kellogg Company. And that's a weird fucking note to end on, but there you have it, the story of David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, now known as the Son of Hope, or he wishes now known as the Son of Hope. But really, there you don't have it, considering there have been how many versions of the story told with how many details changed, then retracted, then restated, media distortion, very different descriptions of the shooter from witnesses. Just fucking tell us the truth, Dave. You aren't getting any younger. We need to know the real deal. Anyway, let's get into the letters. Sorry for the long-winded. I thought that was the condensed version of the story of David Berkowitz, but pretty long, like 22 pages of script there. I'm just going to go chronologically from the first to the last letter that I got. I'll see if I can remember any of what I said to him to get these responses. Getting into the letters here, this first one is dated June 16th, 2012. So basically, I had written to David introducing myself, what I was working on with the comic book, and explaining that just sort of a letter from him that I could put in the comic book would be cool. Not really much conversation on my end for that first one other than a basic introduction. He wrote back June 16th, 2012. Thanks for your letter. Honestly, I am not interested in the comic book project you're working on, the subject matter. But overall, I think comics are a good means of communication. I grew up reading them, the usual stuff, DC and Marvel comics. I liked comics like Jughead and Archie. I don't even know if these are published anymore. In any case, I sometimes use Christian comics to reach people, especially younger ones, with the message of God's love. I was not in any way offended by your letter. In fact, for a strange irony, late last year I sent my story to a church in Scottsbluff. It was the Grace Community Chapel at 300 Valley View Drive in Scottsbluff. I think this might be far across town from where you lived. But when I first saw your return address, I thought to myself, wow, someone from the church is writing to me. Well, I have a good friend whom I've been corresponding with for years. He lives across the state in Omaha, but he has a blog and a website. I'm sending you his latest update in case you will to contact Billy D. I think it's really cool that you make music and how you have a jittery energy. I'm kind of like this, although I'm slowing down a little as I'm approaching 60. But I love to write and create. As you know, I am serious about my faith, so writing is basically spiritual. But you can read my online journal by going to ariseandshine.org. Thinking it over, I'm not exactly sure how your comic book is arranged or what your forum section exactly consists of, but if you'd like, I will include with this letter a short message. It's up to you to use it or not. Right now, I'm thinking of what to say. It will be something positive, however. And thanks for the offer to send me books and music, but I wish to decline as there is nothing I need or want, but thanks for the offer. Write again if you'd like. I'm praying for you, I really am. May God bless you and watch over you, and may your life be filled with peace. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. And now, these letters are all typed, but he typed sincerely, then wrote in pen David B, and then under that typed David Berkowitz. So that was the end of the main part of the letter, and then he had enclosed a copy of an article about himself on this arisandshine.org, this Christian website that covered his story or something. Women's Christian Temperance Union of South Dakota newsletter. So I don't know, just like some sort of press thing, basically, a website he was on. And then there was another sheet attached to this first letter. It was, I wrote this for your forum. You could use it if you want. If you need to shorten it, please let me know. God bless. And then this is the letter that he sent to put in my comic book. And this actually did get printed in that first issue. It's on the inside of the back cover. If you've ever happened to have read it, which I doubt you have. Anyway. This is what he wrote. You think that murder, serial killings, and crime is cool. It's okay to read about it in comics, but the real stuff is awful. I know. I've been in prison for 35 years doing time for 6 bodies, none who deserved having their lives end like they did. There is nothing cool about crime or doing time in the big house. Don't let the media and Hollywood brainwash you into thinking that killing people and coming to prison is glorious. It's a nightmare. Go with God instead. I mean it. The devil is a liar. He will use you for his own ends, then dump you when he's done using you. Satan is not your friend. He's your worst enemy. Jesus Christ is your friend. He's the real winner. David Berkowitz, formerly known as Son of Sam, a slave to Sam Hain. Today I am the Son of Hope. Why? Because Jesus Christ says so. Go to my website at arisandshine.org. Permission is granted at no charge or any kind to use the above words for a comic book by my real name. David Berkowitz, and then also again in pen, David B. So that's the first letter I ever got from David Berkowitz after introducing myself and asking if he wanted to write something for my comic book, Risher. I do not recall exactly what my response was, but I did keep reading, and I've got 4 more letters here, so let's get into the next one. Oh, and he included some pamphlets. One that says, "Are you afraid of the dark?" And then it goes on to be about God and Jesus and stuff. And then another pamphlet titled "Who Made It?" Which somehow tries to tie the space program and Isaac Newton into Christianity. I don't know. He was always sending little inserts like this and stuff. Next letter, July 18th, 2012. Hi, I have your letter of June 26th. How ironic my letter came on your 30th birthday. Glad I was able to contribute something on paper to your comic. So he had written me back, and I got it on June 24th, which was my birthday. So yeah, I remember thinking that was kind of a cool little present to go to the mailbox, and there was a letter from David there. And then I wrote to him 2 days later. Glad I was able to contribute something on paper to your comic. I still cannot get over the fact that back in late December of last year, it may have been even in November, I sensed a desire to pray for your town in the general area of western Nebraska. Not knowing anything about Scottsbluff, I asked my friend in Omaha to look up a few addresses of churches in your town. He sent me 2, and I wrote to one of them, no response. But I continued to pray on and off for Scottsbluff. Then, months later, your letter came. Call it what you will, coincidence or divine design, just one of those things. Of course, I was unaware of your adoption and what you went through in childhood, and that church was a negative and painful experience for you. So I responded with my personal experience with Christianity and all the bullshit of my childhood and blah blah blah. Just sort of giving him my side of, I'm not really into I'm not a big Christian dude, you know. I mean, if you follow the Twitter, you know I'm always tweeting atheist stuff or something like that. Anyway, of course I was unaware of your adoption and what you went through in childhood, and that church was a negative and painful experience for you. How sad. It should not have been this way. I don't believe the Lord is anything like those church people you unfortunately had to deal with back then. I could understand why you'd have an aversion to religion today. I don't blame you for your feelings, etc. Tragically, you were exposed to empty religion, which is the works and self-efforts of people to try to get right with God. Tragically as well, you missed on knowing what faith in Christ is really supposed to be about, having an intimate and loving relationship with your Creator rather than something of dread and fear. You were robbed. This is my feeling. You were not able to meet the real Jesus because you were stuck around people who, while claiming to follow him, obviously knew nothing of the real Christ themselves. This is sad, but it is not uncommon. And it was sad to learn about your grandfather that was a war veteran. He was not buried in the way he had hoped for. Because the church I went to 3 times a week and we constantly donated to and spent time at, blah, 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 back in the day, wouldn't let my granddad have the kind of grave he had wanted because it would have looked better than the pastor's own grave, who was already laid out with his wife in it. The pastor said there couldn't be any more ornate graves than his own at his church. So, complaints about that. No doubt the church is filled with many bad examples. You mentioned the child sex abuse scandals and the television evangelicals and their failings. Man is a fallen creature, and power and greed can corrupt one's heart. This is why, for example, the Bible condemns the love of money. It is not money that is evil, rather it is one's love of money which can cause a soul's downfall. But I am not going to make excuses here. I know many good, kind, tender-hearted, and loving Christians to be critical of the church. I have met many lay volunteer ministers who have walked through these doors and sat down with men like myself and other felons, and shared with us and demonstrated to us the love of Christ. For me, this is sufficient. I believe God is real and that He cares for me. I agree with you on much of what you wrote on. I agree as well that no one should have to be tormented by their past failings, sins, and mistakes. I am thankful to know and believe in a God of forgiveness and mercy. And as for your question, if I had been born 20 years later with the advancements in mental health treatments, would I have been better off? I don't know, but I don't think so. While I did have mental and emotional problems and I exhibited troubling behaviors, I did get involved in Satanism and the occult. I was also lonely when I got out of the service at the age of 21. I was looking for friends, as all my old friends either moved away or had gone on with their lives to where I no longer fit in. Then I met others who turned out not to be good friends. There is no pill that can take away loneliness, dissatisfaction, demonic control, etc. Well, this is all for now. I was in no way offended by anything you wrote or asked in your letter. Take care. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. I do remember reading that now, that I had asked him if he thought had there been the advancements in psychology, from 77 to 97, big leaps forward, and even now in 2019, would he have been able to get the kind of help he needed to prevent what he did? And it sounds like he believes he was fucked. He was just looking for something to take the pain and the loneliness away. He felt like he was alone, and to be alone in somewhere like New York, that's gotta suck, because you're surrounded by millions of people yet still feel utterly alone. So as you see, again, a lot of talk about religion. I threw out my, here's why I don't care for your religion, and he was like, oh yeah, well, I probably wouldn't care for it either, you got robbed. But I don't know, good conversation. Like, he doesn't sound like a totally insane person. He actually listened to what I said and wrote back and commented and was trying to have a conversation. You don't get a feeling of self-importance going on in these letters. Next letter, dated September 11th, 2012. Oh shit, a David Berkowitz letter on 9/11. Dun dun dun. I was happy to receive your letter of October 29th, or August 29th. So it must have took me a while to get back to him. Great hearing from you and thanks for the comic book. It was a nice surprise. It must be 40 or more years before I last read a comic book, let alone an issue of Jughead and Archie. Thanks. Oh, I sent him some old comic books. I had some old copies of Jughead and Archie's laying around from like probably the 70s. And he had mentioned in one of the previous letters that he liked Archie and Jughead. So I sent him some comic books. And then this was also not long after my son was born. My son was born in July 2012. I was happy to receive your letter of August 29th. Great hearing from you and things. It was a nice surprise. I haven't read an issue of Archie. Okay. I'm sorry to learn about your son's heart issues. Since receiving your letter, I began to pray for him and for you too. As parents, you and your wife must be under a lot of stress, even though he's home now and is doing better. Oh, so that's why I didn't write back in so long, because I was busy having a son with a heart condition. As parents, you and your wife must be under a lot of stress, even though he's home now and is doing better. It must have been a difficult ordeal nonetheless. While you may have been robbed of an opportunity to know God in a personal and intimate way, you can still change all this around and you could get to know him today. I mean, although you have a relationship with the Creator now, which is nice, and even though you have a degree of contentment, one can always go deeper in that relationship. This is just something to think about. I do appreciate your honesty and frankness too. Well, I never said anything about a relationship with the Creator. I just said I believe in like energy, which is basically saying science. There's energy in everything. That's about as close as I get. It is also interesting that you mentioned viewing your belief system as Native American than what is considered to be traditional Christianity. I happen to love Native American and First Nations. In Canada, they prefer this term. Like he chimes in with a little Rain Man fact, our Canadians prefer the term First Nations. In fact, I write on occasion to various tribal chiefs and those who live on reservations. Just yesterday, I sent letters to tribal chiefs in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. So yeah, I had told him that as far as like my belief of energy, it really is sort of more just like the Great Spirit kind of thing, I think is what I compared it to. And that's what he's referencing there. Yes, prison is a difficult place to be in. In fact, it could be a nightmare depending on what facility one is confined to and what one's situation is. One of the hardest parts is having feelings of hopelessness, loss, and powerlessness as you see life go on without you. I cannot use a computer and I have never been on the internet. If I was to be released tomorrow, I would have to learn how to do just about everything. I've never used a cell phone or an iPhone or an iPod. I've never paid a bill online or even know how to use a credit card. I'm technologically ignorant. In prison, the world just passes you by, and if not for my faith in God and my sense of purpose in sharing my faith, what would I do with my life? Watch TV all day? Scary thought. But thankfully, I am very active and positive. I thank God for this and for the hope He has placed within my heart. Well, to briefly answer some of your questions, I am not stuck in a box all day. In fact, I'm not in my cell all that much in that I have 2 jobs here, plus I am active in chapel services and Bible studies. I stay busy. I am not in solitary, but I do have my own cell. I am in an approximately 600-man general population. I work as a caregiver on weekday afternoons at the prison's 64-man intermediate care program for the men who have special mental health issues and may need extra care and support. I've done this job for more than 20 years and the staff fully trusts me to handle these men gently and properly. While in the early evening, I work with about 20 other men in the prison's kitchen. There are 3 shifts in the kitchen, which is quite an operation. I'm on the 3rd shift. On weekends, I help to oversee and lead the worship services in the chapel. I can go to the outdoor recreation yard or stay in the day room of my housing unit, or go to the chapel or stay in my cell. I am not isolated at all. In here, I am treated like everyone else. I'm just another face in the crowd. I'm thankful for this. Of course, prison life is difficult. You've probably seen enough reality shows and documentaries to know what goes on inside of a prison. But by the grace of God, I am doing very well, even after spending 35 years behind the walls. And I can see that your life, at least at work, is fairly mundane. Most people do not like their jobs. They do them because they have to. It pays the bills. I think it's rare for someone to have a job they enjoy. Kitchen work is not fun. It is hard and sweaty and dirty, but it keeps me humble and active. Much of my own fulfillment comes from writing. I could spend hours behind my typewriter. I do correspondence, write my journal, or prepare youth messages, plus more. You have your hobbies, and this is a good thing. Well, I have to end this now. God bless you. Write when you can, and if you want to. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. See, like, he sounds like just a normal guy. He's describing his day, what he does, what he believes, how he views life. Like, when you remove the fact that he killed 6 people and tried to kill another 7 and would have kept killing had they not caught him, like, remove that. 35 years past the whole thing, he almost sounds like a normal person, and that's where it becomes this really weird, like, uncanny valley scenario, except instead of applying the uncanny valley to robots or automatons or whatever, you're comparing it to this almost unfathomable insanity, I guess. It's weird to think about how on the other side of this piece of paper, this person who was able to put together these sentences and carry on a conversation and interact just like a totally normal person also killed these people. It's just weird. It's off-putting. We always, when we watch TV, cop shows or documentaries or whatever, and they play these people up as these monsters, especially before the era of Netflix documentaries, when we were just reading Time Life books and shit like that. They always painted it as these insane sounding monsters that are just so impossibly human, but then you read these letters or you see the actual footage of them talking, and you're just, that's just a person. That's just a person who did a horrible thing. It creates this cognitive dissonance between, like, how you're trained to think of these kinds of people and then what they are in real life, who they are when you're interacting with them. Next letter, January 7th, 2013. Hi, I hope this letter finds you doing well. I have your letter of October 29th. You've probably been thinking I have forgotten you. Not so. Now it is my turn to apologize for taking such a long time to get back to you. I too have a lot going on. Between working 2 jobs at the prison plus the busyness of the holiday season, I'm just glad the holidays are over now and things are getting back to normal. I have been doing okay. I'm enjoying the New York winter and the snow, although we've yet to get a really big snowfall. I'm up in what is the foothills of the Catskill Mountains. It's very pretty up this way, although the actual Catskill mountain range is a little further north. I'm at the start of it, however, and about 20 to 25 minutes away from where I am, is one of the best rock climbing areas on the East Coast. This is the Shawangunk Mountains. You could probably look online on Wikipedia and read up on the Catskills and the Shawangunk Mountains if you're curious. When I was a teenager, I did some brief rock climbing and once, for about a year, was a member of the Adirondack Mountain Club. How the hell does he know about Wikipedia if he's never been on the internet? Is you lying to me, Dave? As for my letter, thank you for letting me know it is now in the first issue of your comic, and thank you as well for including everything I said. Actually, I had forgotten all about my letter and your comic until you mentioned it. How can someone get a copy, or can someone go online to see and read your work? Some of my friends may be interested in checking it out. I have a real passion for young people as well, and I hope something I said will touch one of them in a good way and maybe make that young person think. So many have lost their way and their minds. And I've lost my way and my mind. Since we exchanged letters last, there was a series of tragic mass shootings. It's every day now, Dave. No need to mention them by name, but there is a pall of sadness over our nation now as people try to make sense of everything. These shooters were young men who had their lives ahead of them, and look what they did. And these young men were smart. Who can make sense of this, and who knows why? As for the documentaries and movies that have been made around the so-called Son of Sam case, I have not seen any of them. I think they're all basically the same, just a remix of old material and footage. I have never seen the so-called Summer of Sam and have no interest in it whatsoever. Others have told me about portions of it. Most of it was stuff that was Hollywoodized. This means that it was exaggerated for entertainment purposes and was a far twisting of what was true or accurate. Remember that these kinds of productions, whether movies, documentaries, or crime-type shows, are made for the purpose of making money for those who are involved in the production process and for the film industry or the networks. Thus, entertainment comes before truth, although the makers of these productions would insist otherwise. I'm not complaining or criticizing them, I'm only telling it like it is. So yeah, I had asked had he ever seen Son of Sam or any of the documentaries or anything like that, and I kind of gave him a rundown of how they portrayed his character in the Summer of Sam, which wasn't really much at all. If you've ever seen it, he's not really even a prominent figure in it, just more his essence. People acknowledging his presence in the area is what drives the movie. Concerning your life, you said you feel as if you are hanging on by a thread. Well, I must not have been in a good spot when I wrote this, which for a large chunk of my life I wasn't. Concerning your life, you said you feel as if you are hanging on by a thread. Well, I know you're not interested in religion, neither am I. I consider my faith in God a personal relationship and not a religious thing. However, my thoughts on what you shared are that mankind is not supposed to go it alone, and he underlined go it alone with pen. Or is that... No, he underlined it with the typewriter. Okay. Mankind is not supposed to go it alone. In other words, man was made to walk with God and have a relationship with him. Also, that according to the Bible, we have been placed on this earth for a purpose. But of course, if we do not know God in any personal way, as a son would know his father, and if we do not know what purpose God has for us, we would, to a degree, certainly feel out of place in this world. As you put it, you feel stuck in some kind of limbo. I also think, in my opinion, that one's need for anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications may be in part the result of one's being out of harmony with his creator. I'm sure there are naturally occurring chemical imbalances in some people where such medications are helpful. But overall, I think mankind, if out of harmony with God and therefore cannot function as properly as he or she has been created to be, I hope I am making sense. Mankind is, overall, very far from God and far from the time when, according to the Bible, man walked with God in the Garden of Eden. The world has since been corrupted by sin, and sin, by its very nature, causes us to become separated from God. God still loves us, but sin has caused a blockage in our relationship with Him. Because God is holy, sin is the opposite of holiness, and we are thus very far from God. Only through placing one's faith in Christ can this gap of separation be bridged so that man makes his peace with the Creator by faith in Christ and a new relationship is forged between God and man. You can disagree with all this, but this is my explanation as to why you've been feeling like you do. I am a Jewish person who believes that Jesus is his Savior and Messiah. I have no specific denomination I belong to. I am simply a Jewish person who believes in Jesus. This is not a paradox. Jesus was Jewish. Bye for now. I am praying for you, but do give me the information on where someone could check out your comic. Thanks. Sincerely, David. And he didn't type his name, David Berkowitz, or anything. He just signed it David. So you're getting a little more friendly there, a little more familiar. And then I actually stopped writing to him soon after this because I moved to Colorado and never got a P.O. box. Last letter, April 9th, 2013. Hi, I have your letter postmarked March 9th. Hope you and the family are well. I do pray for you, and I always ask God to watch over you and keep you healthy and safe. Thanks for the information about your website, Risher Comic. I have shared your site with a couple of friends, and thanks as well for the information about the lottery. I haven't gone to the library yet, but I am scheduled to go tomorrow morning. You didn't mention who the author is, but it is easy to find out as they have some huge information volumes of past and current authors and their works. And there's another series of books where you can find who the author is just by looking up the title. Is he describing the card catalog to me? So I told him about the short story, The Lottery. Yes, while I have never seen the movie you refer to, I have heard about it. It was controversial when it first came out, mostly because everything director Spike Lee does is controversial. He's known to push the envelope. It's just so weird to hear this guy describing it like, he pushes the envelope. But I believe it quickly died out in the theaters. I think that if Spike Lee was not the producer, the movie never would have even received the media attention that it did. Hey man, Adrian Brody was in that flick and he is an excellent actor. John Leguizamo, come on man. But I believe it is pretty much gone now except for occasional showings on one of the many movie channels. To me it was just another mountain to climb over. I don't hear much about the film anymore, which is fine with me. As for receiving royalties, etc., this has been a media-driven misconception from the outset. I have never received a single penny from any book or movie that has been produced, and I would not want to. For movies such as Summer of Sam, no permission was required from me to produce this film, and the same is true for any film. I think there was a made-for-TV film which came out in the mid-1980s. In addition, I have never met Mr. Lee or anyone from his company. Unfortunately, for 35 years, the media continues to promote the idea that I am profiting from these kinds of things. In reality, I have nothing to do with any of this. My permission is not needed should someone decide to write a book about the case or whatever. It is public information. And thanks for sharing about the group Twisted. I must have talked to him about Twisted lyrics or something? I don't know. I'll ask a friend of mine to look them up online. I don't know their mailing address and there is no way for me to contact them from here, but I did find it interesting that they would connect me with Aleister Crowley, as his teachings were influential to me when I was a deeply lost and tormented soul and was deep into Satanism. I must have mentioned something about Twisted's lyrics, possibly referencing him at some point in Aleister Crowley and whatnot. I don't know. Plus, they're big into serial killer stuff. Anyway, I mean, if you know who Twisted is, you know who Twisted is. Anyway, I just don't remember telling him about them. Thought it was interesting. Aleister Crowley's teachings influenced me. I mostly followed the demonically channeled teachings of Robert de Grimston, who was then leader of a group back then known as the Process Church of Final Judgment. Oh my god, I totally forgot. He mentioned that in here. I became fascinated with his channeled messages and ultimately, I truly believe, both hypnotized and brainwashed. Wow, yeah. So much I haven't gone back and connected since I've read these letters. I do not expect anyone to understand these things, of course. To the average person, it would be nonsense. Only one who was at one time drawn to the maelstrom of a power occult leader and a herd of his fanatical followers would understand the power of these forces to pull one into another realm where good was portrayed as evil and evil was thought to be good. A long story. So right here at the end, like the last letter I have from him before I stopped writing to him, he's finally starting to talk to me about all this weird shit that we've never really gotten an explanation on. God damn it, I should have kept going. I do not expect anyone to understand these things, of course. To the average person, it would be nonsense. Only one who was at one time drawn into the maelstrom of a power occult leader and a herd of his fanatical followers would understand the power of these forces to pull one into another realm where good was portrayed as evil and evil was thought to be good. A long story, ... Wow. And he talks about the process. Just briefly, you asked me about hell. I believe, as I believe the Bible describes it, that there is a literal hell. But what is so hard to believe about the existence of such a place? If there is a heaven for those who followed God, why would there not be a hell, a place of punishment, for those who did bad things and either knowingly or unknowingly followed the ways of Satan? A civilized society has its jails and prisons for those who break society's laws. Why cannot God have a place to punish those who broke his laws and did harm to many who showed no remorse? Society has its courts and judges to punish wrongdoers. If God is a being of justice, which the Bible actually declares him to be, then why would it be inconceivable for there to be an actual place called hell where unrepentant lawbreakers would go? Think about this. This is all for now. Oh, and thank you for the offer, but please do not send me packages. I appreciate your kindness, but I'm fine. Be well. Sincerely, David B. And that is the last letter I have from David. Want once I get a few bills out of the way, I think I am going to open up a post office box and try to get back to writing him. He's not getting any younger. He's probably in his mid-70s by now. He's moved to a new facility. I'll have to track that down. But if I can get things going, I will try to get back to writing David and keep you updated on anything I might hear from him. But that is it. That is all I have for Letters from My Friend Dave. What did we learn? No clue. Maybe nothing. You can't trust a serial killer. You can't trust a witness. You can't trust the media. You can't trust a lawyer. But is that really something we just learned? Didn't we know going into this that you can't really trust anyone regardless of body count or lack thereof? We learned Dave isn't very tech savvy. He likes being helpful, and he is really into Jesus. I hope you like this episode. It's a one-shot sort of thing. It's like that old Looney Tunes cartoon where the wolf tries to join the circus and his act is drinking a gallon of gas and then swallowing a match, and he shows the guy interviewing him how he does the trick, but then he dies. Because the problem is he can only do it once. This episode is my version of that, which was a really dark skit for a kid's cartoon now that I think about it. I has no more letters to read to you. Maybe one day, but not now. If any of you out there have a killer pen pal you think would want to correspond with me, let me know. Maybe I'll send them a letter. Send them some stamp money. See how it goes. Let me know if any of you out there write to other people in prison. NoBetterDeath.info for all info on No Better Death. Show notes, links to social media. Listen to the show right there on the site. Whatever you need, it's right there. If you want to say something to me or your fellow death nerds, hit me up on Facebook or Twitter. Just search No Better Death and get at me with stories you'd like to hear covered on the show. Personal stories about death. Tell me to fuck off. Whatever you got, I'll get it on the show. You can email me at nobetterdeath@gmail.com. Please keep spreading the word. Tell your friends, your family, your enemies, members of the clergy, mental patients, little kids, sex workers, whoever you know. Tell them, please, please. And leave an iTunes review. Actually, thinking of doing a contest. Fuck it. We'll just do it. No thinking about it. Let's just do it. Today is the 14th, so I'm going to say we'll say the 15th. Leave an iTunes review between July 15th and August 15th, and I will pick one reviewer to randomly win a vial of dirt that I got from BTK's yard. That is right. You might have saw the video I put up on YouTube or Facebook. Part of my travels during my absence, I went to Wichita on my way to Kansas City to hit up Strange Fest. Stopped in Wichita and went to BTK's house, or where his house was, and a few of his murder sites. Got a big cup of dirt from his house, so if you're into murderabilia and you'd like to win a vial of dirt from BTK's yard, leave an iTunes review July 15th through August 15th, and I will pick one person to randomly win that cool prize. If you're not into murderabilia, I understand some people think it's creepy. You can just go ahead and ignore this. But if you're into it, you want to file a BTK dirt, leave an iTunes review, someone's going to win. I've got 2 minis I'm going to try to record this weekend and get out sometime in the next week or two. And then I'm working on scripting the next episode, the full-length episode, Dead on Air, where we're going to take a look at people who killed themselves on live television. If there's any graphic artists out there, so I won a contest to have 100 shirts and 500 stickers pressed for free, but I need a design, and I suck at graphic design. It's just not in my wheelhouse. Many things I can do, graphic design is not one of them. If one of you out there could do me a quick design job, I could give you some free merch in exchange for it. Basically what I'm looking for is, if you remember Mr. Yuck, the green face thing that told you not to drink bleach, looking to do like a Mr. Yuck face with X's for the eyes so he looks dead, and then in text in the circle around him, have the top half of it say "Try not to die," bottom half of the circle says NoBetterDeath.info. Pretty basic logo right there. So yeah, if anybody could put that together for me, hit me up. NoBetterDeath@gmail.com, or hit me up on Facebook, No Better Death. I am sick, way too scared of going to prison to ever kill someone, Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.